Hello, everyone, and welcome to Emotional Grit, the podcast where you can learn about the power of perspective and the science that fuels us. I'm your host, Jennifer Fernjack, and I'm happy to say that my guest today is Willy Shelton. He is a bee hobbyist and helps bring bees to the state of Alaska. So today we're going to learn about things that people can do for bees and things that bees can do for people, including from a health perspective. So please feel free to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube under Emotional Grit. And with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks, Willy, for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
And of course, I say here, knowing that I'm in Minnesota and you're in Alaska, but thanks for doing this virtually. So
Absolutely.
now, how did you become a bee hobbyist, and what all does that entail? Like, what first initially piqued your interest?
Wow. Okay. So I want to say probably 10 years ago, my family went over to a friend's house. He's the music pastor at our church, and he and his wife had been keeping a beehive pretty consistently for like 5 or 6 years at that point. And as a gift, they gave us a little jar of their honey, and we went out and we were like at their little campfire in their backyard and whatnot, and just talking about what it's like to have bees. And he just kind of gave me the 30,000 foot, overview of what he does. And we went home that night, and I told my wife, I was like, I think we could do that. That would be a lot of fun. So looked into, getting a basic beehive setup. Just looked online and bought it. And then in Alaska, you can't buy bees all the time. You have to buy them in the winter. You place an order, and then they come in the spring. And so, like through the fall, I picked up all the little tools and stuff that I'd need, and then we placed an order in February, and then the bees arrived the last week of April. And I want to say now that was 9 years ago, I think. And yeah, with the exception of one summer, ever since then, I've always had at least one beehive. I had to take one summer off because we had sold our house and we were moving. So we were bouncing around to houses while we were waiting for ours to finish being built. And so I missed 1 year, but other than that, I've kept them every year since.
Now, I know that when I moved, or over the years, I've asked friends or family, would you mind keeping my cats for me during the move for the day? Or would you mind keeping for me my artwork until I can hang it or whatever? But what did you do with your bees? Because I would think that most people are afraid of them. So it was like, what would you do during that time of transition?
That's a good question. So I don't keep my bees over winter. I order new bees every February, and I get them in April. So in Alaska, we have very, very cold temperatures and very short days in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, it's all out beautiful, 24 hours a day. So what we do up here is we order from a small mom and pop's place here locally, and then they fly down and get thousands of packages of bees that are coming from the almond orchards in California. And after they're all done harvesting in the almond orchards, the commercial beekeepers then will sell off packages of bees, and each package has a queen with them, and then they're put on pallets and flown up here. And over the course of like 2 or 3 weekends in a row, there'll be these huge flights of beehives that come up. And then we just pick them up from the supplier, and I put the bees into my beehive, and then they stay with me all summer. And then here in about a week, so first week of August to the second week of August, I collect all the honey, and then I euthanize the hive, clean everything up, and get ready for the next spring. So that year that we weren't with bees, I knew we were going to be selling the house, so I just didn't order any that year. I didn't have to have somebody take on a beehive for me. Yeah.
Well, and
There
when you
are
mentioned
some
that,
people that overwinter, but it's it's a lot of work and it's pretty expensive. And for the time and effort, it's easier for me to do a gentle euthanasia, and then we just we're done for the winter.
now, do bees normally pass away anyway based on the end of the season, or do they hibernate somewhere usually, or how does that work usually?
So it's different up here than it is everywhere else. If you don't prep the hive in a way that they can survive a winter, they won't survive on their own. There is no hibernation uh, that they can do that will withstand the temperatures that we get. So if someone is going to winter over, they'll take all of the honey out of the hive. They'll feed the bees uh, a pure sugar syrup. Um, and the reason that they do that is it if you're using just sugar and water rather than honey as a long-term food source, they will they won't have to leave the hive as often. So bees will not defecate in their hive. And if you're having a brutal winter, the goal is to keep them in there as much as you possibly can. And so overwintering here in Alaska means not having their traditional food source because it has carbohydrates and proteins in it, and the proteins create a greater need for defecation.
All right.
Um, so by going to straight sugar water and removing the honey, they it's just sugar that they're intaking, and they can go a whole lot longer before having to do they call it a cleansing flight, where the bee leaves, does its thing, and then comes back.
Okay.
So, number one, you've got to change all of their food structure. Number two, bees don't like the cold, but even more than the cold, what's actually lethal to them is moisture. So, one of the things that a lot of people in the lower 48 states aren't familiar with is the condensation change between cold and hot. It's something that you guys see a lot down there in the middle of the summer when you're um, what's the right word, when you've got a glass of ice water or iced tea and you bring it outside and then all of a sudden there's moisture on the outside of the glass.
Yes.
That temperature change creates that condensation on the outside. Well, in a beehive it's in reverse. So the condensation on the glass is on the outside because the outside is warm and the inside is cold. Well, in Alaska, when the bees are inside their hive, they have to keep it, mid to high 90s to keep themselves warm. And so the cold outside can create condensation on the inside, and those little drips of water are what kills off a hive.
Huh.
So you have to put like cedar shavings inside the lid, and you've got to have something to soak up that moisture to keep them from freezing.
Yeah. So
But yeah,
normally then, like a hobbyist aside, as far as like just bees being out in nature, what happens in Alaska then, knowing that every year there's going to be that huge temperature change where all of a sudden winter's coming? Is it I mean, how do things get pollinated, and how does that work?
there there is no pollination in the wintertime. Like, all the leaves fall off all the trees. It's funny, we joke that, my wife's from Wisconsin and she was used to 4 seasons. Up here, we have winter and summer. Like, when you
Right,
see the
right.
first couple leaves start to turn green, this is not an exaggeration. Within 3 weeks, all the trees are leaved out. And then
Wow.
when you see the first trees starting to turn yellow, it's done in like 3 weeks. Everything turns brown, dead,
Huh.
falls off the trees, and it's gone. So
Wow.
our bees, one thing that's cool about bees is they can recognize the changes in temperature, and then they start adjusting everything within their hive. So a typical bee, like a worker bee in the summertime, a queen lays an egg in May. 7 days later, that egg is hatching. And then for the next 6 weeks, that bee will fly every, like the first couple of weeks they're in the hive, and they're what they call nursery bees. They take care of the larva that's in there. And then about 2 weeks in, they become a worker bee. And for the next 4 weeks, they'll fly 1 million miles in a month, and then they
A
die.
million miles?
Yeah,
They're so
yeah, it's
small.
crazy. They're tiny, and
Wow.
they're they're amazing creatures. But so literally a bee's lifespan is 6 weeks long, except for when the temperature drops.
Yeah.
When the temperature starts to drop, they start feeding the bees, the larva, um, a different mixture than what they fed all summer long. And I don't know how it works, but those bees, once the beehive decides they're not going to be going out anymore because it's too cold, and they create this ball around the queen inside the hive, and that's their job, is to keep her warm. And over the winter, that ball will get smaller and smaller and smaller as the outside bees die off. Um, those bees don't die in 6 weeks. They live through the whole winter, protecting the queen from the elements. And then once production starts up again in the spring, and as soon as she starts laying, they start feeding for a 6 week lifespan. I don't know how they know to do that. I don't know what they do differently.
Yeah.
But it is pretty fascinating that, 90% of the bees that she lays, they don't make it 2 months, but there's that little chunk going into winter, and whatever they do differently allows those bees to live throughout the whole winter. I don't ever
Wow.
experience that though, because I don't want my bees to suffer through the winter. I feel
Yeah.
like we know that all of the steps that we can take in Alaska still only give us about a 30% survival rate. And I'm pretty big on animal husbandry. Like, I want to take care of, the animals that I have. And so even though they're insects, I feel like I don't want them. It's better for me to harvest, finish off the hive, and then just start fresh
Yeah.
the
I could
next
see
spring.
that. So, do you remember that cartoon that was popular years ago called The Far Side?
Yes.
So, I remember there was this one cartoon where this lady is driving her car and her arms are out and she's driving and she has a really tall hairdo, like a beehive hairstyle,
Yep.
like someone from the B-52s band, so her hair's high and she's driving. She's like, I will not be afraid. I will not be afraid. And in the back seat, there's this bee flying around, because it just acknowledges the fact that most people are afraid of them.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, do you think that bees get a bad rap? I mean, is it mostly that bees usually just like want to leave people alone, but if you get too close to them, then they feel agitated, or do you think that people should have kind of a healthy respect and go, you know what, I'll stay in my lane? I'm just wondering if we're kind of afraid of them when a good chunk of the time maybe we're fine. They
That's
don't.
a really good question. And the answer in my mind is it depends.
Yeah.
So I've had, over the last 10 years, probably 25 different hives. There are some hives that I get where, like the one I have this year, they're the most chill bees I've ever had. I'll get in the hive. I'll be doing some work to make things more efficient for them. I'm pulling out frames of eggs and brood, and moving things. Now one bee is flying on me. Like, I could be completely out of my suit and they would be totally chill. There are other years where I've opened up a hive, and I've been so thankful that I've been wearing my bee suit, because I've been hit by 30,000 bees. And so it just, we don't know what the temperature of the emotional space is
Yeah.
for a hive until it gets going. But honestly, like, the thing that I think most people don't realize is honeybees don't, like, they have one job. Like, their job is to leave and find and come back. Like, that's all they're doing. And so it's very different from hornets or wasps or yellow jackets, things like that. Those suckers hurt,
Yeah.
and they're looking for a reason to be mad at you, right? Honeybees aren't that way. We have had literally 100,000 bees a year are in our yard, and
Oh.
like, my kids run around and like nobody ever gets stung ever.
But do you wonder though, is that kind of like when people have a dog, like the dog knows your scent? Like maybe they know your scent.
I think that bees do, like, I have seen that, like there was a time a couple years ago when I opened up the hive, and your queen is never supposed to leave, right? Um, and I watched the queen fly out of the hive, and I was like, oh no, like what do I do? And I called up the people that I get my bees from. I've got a good relationship with them, and I was like, my queen just flew off, and they were like, don't worry about it, just stand there. She'll come back. She'll come back to you. And I was like, okay. So literally for like an hour, I stood as, thousands of bees are coming and going as they're doing their, their search for food. And I couldn't tell if she came back, but they were like, give it an hour, just sit down by the hive and relax. She's going to orient to you and she'll come back. And I was like, okay.
Huh.
Closed up the box. And then 3 days later, I went back in the box because if you wait 3 days, any eggs that she had laid will now be in larva form. If she's gone, there's no new eggs at that point.
Okay.
So they said, wait 3 days and then get back in the box. So I get back in the box and I'm looking, and lo and behold, I'm seeing eggs all over the place. I didn't even have to find her. I was like,
wow.
Okay, she came back. So yes, they definitely can smell things or visually sight things out. But honestly, like, I don't think that has anything to do with how they behave around my kids. Like, I have complete strangers come over and they want to see in the hive, so I'll lift the hive box, I'll lift the lid off and slide things up for them to see, and they'll be 3 feet away from the hive, and the bees act the exact same with anyone as they do with the beekeeper. They are just very single-minded, and the only time I've ever been stung working in my hives is if I make a mistake. So like if a bee were to, get trapped under my shirt, that's where they're going to feel like they're in danger. They know that they're going to die if they sting. All hornets and wasps don't die after they sting.
Oh.
Bees know it's a one and done thing. So they're only going to do that like in defense of themselves or of the hive. So it's not the same as dealing with yellow jackets, and the stings don't actually hurt. It's like, oh, I think I just got stung. Not like when a yellow jacket hits you,
Yeah,
So,
it's with purpose. Yeah, I know,
yes.
I get that. But circling back to the idea of bees being able to smell things, before I met you, I had read this article about a study being done at the University of Michigan, and I have a few notes on it here with me.
Yeah.
But the findings of this study, as it was written up here in the Huffington Post, it shows that there's research there that shows that honeybees can detect cancer in the breath of a human. And that sounds super surreal, kind of like, really? But here's the science behind it. As I have here on my cheat sheet. It reads, they can do so by detecting biomarkers or chemical concentrations associated with lung cancer just by sniffing the human's breath. The research team plans to develop a non-invasive test which will only require patients to breathe into a device on the sensor side, and then the other side would be where the honeybee would be, and then they would analyze the results. And this might sound kind of surreal, but if you think about it, there are other studies that have shown that there are dogs that can sniff out things like if their owner has cancer. I also have noted here they can tell if their owner has diabetes and if the person's blood sugar is either too high or too low. They can also tell if their owner has narcolepsy and if the person's about to fall asleep. I know a number of years ago I met someone with narcolepsy, and he had shared with me how he had served in the military and how he was over in Iraq. And he mentioned that there were other soldiers who would give him a hard time because they all thought he was being lazy, when really he had narcolepsy. So that whole idea of taking a nap, that wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
But dogs can tell that. And then they can also tell if their owner is going to have a seizure, if they've been trained, for epilepsy. And then I also thought it was interesting in the research that I did that there are dogs now that can sniff out COVID-19. So they can tell with greater accuracy, based on what the research I read, if someone has COVID, as opposed to one of the tests that we take that have been made by people.
Yep.
So given the fact that dogs can do all these things, I guess I'm not that surprised that there's uncharted territory here with bees as it relates to being able to sniff out lung cancer. So again, that's a study by the University of Michigan. So given your experience with bees, are you kind of of that same mindset where you're going, you know what, these guys are underestimated. There's a lot of things here we could tap into.
Yeah, I don't keep bees because I need honey. I like we live in America. I can go buy honey wherever I want, right?
Yeah.
I keep bees because they're fascinating. Like they they are more in tune with their surroundings than any other creature that I have. So I have 3 dogs, love them to death. I have goats, I have chickens. I've been around a lot of animals. My wife was in the vet tech side of things for years, and I go and help out in the clinic. And there's something about bees that is just fascinating.
Mhm.
The way they operate, the way they communicate with one another, the way they change their behaviors based on uh, temperatures, times, uh, pressure, like all of these things. And you can physically, literally watch the hive transform over a period of days or weeks, depending on not just what's going on today, but what ends up going on 4 or 5 days from now.
Yeah.
And that to me is pretty cool. I don't doubt at all that bees are sensitive enough to detect cancer or things like that.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense when I watch the intricacies of them. Like, why would we be surprised that they've got a sensitive enough sniffer when we already know that like they they shouldn't be able to fly? Like physics says that they shouldn't be able to fly, and yet they do very efficiently. Like
Yeah.
they already break uh they buck the norm, if you will, on what we would say is normal and right. So yeah, they're super cool.
No doubt. So, how does your family feel about having bees around the property? Like, are your kids totally comfortable, or are they like, okay, that's Dad's hobby. We'll be over here. Are they
that
scared of them?
was a that was a 2 year process. So the first year, our old house, we lived on a less than half-acre lot, but it backed up to a green belt. And so my wife was like, "They're going way out there, Willie." And I was like, "Okay." So I literally was walking about a third of a mile into the woods to carry equipment out there and get the bee set up in the middle of the woods and at this little like open meadow area back there. And it was fine. But then it came time to harvest honey at the end of the season. Honey's heavy. Like each box that I'm lifting that's full of honey is 80 to 100 pounds, and I'm having to carry it while in a bee suit through the woods over stumps. And I was like, not doing that again. So the
Meanwhile, you're
next
looking out for
summer,
moose and bears, and
yes, because
because you're in
that's
Alaska. Yeah.
exactly where they're at, right? So so I told Adrian, I was like, babe, I I love you. And I know that she loved getting our own honey. She was like, "This is so cool." I'm like, "This was a ton of work. Can we put it in our yard this next year?" And she was like, "I mean, yeah, we can put it in the yard, but I want it like as far back and away as we can." And so we put it in the yard the second year, but because it was as far away as it could be, it was in the shade of all the trees,
Mm.
and bees don't come out until it's warm. So
Um,
we were losing like 2 or 3 hours worth of their harvesting time because they wouldn't wake up in the mornings because it was still chilly. So the third year was when I was like, "What do you think about like next to the house where it's warm?" And at that point, like we'd had them for a whole year in the yard, and she knows they fly like in one direction. A bee will leave the hive and fly up to 3 miles. So
that blows my mind.
once she saw the hive in the yard and realized that right next to us, they weren't even staying in the yard, they were going everywhere. She was like, "Yeah, I think that's fine." And so that's what we did from then on. And now the beehive is like 20 feet from my house, and
I
we've
thought
never had a bee come in the house, you
I,
know.
I thought you were going to say, and now the bees are sleeping with us, like a dog would or a cat.
Uh, yeah.
But yeah,
The boys are I've got twin 17-year-olds and then 15-year-old. So 10 years ago, that would have been, 7 and 5. And they loved it. They thought it was just the coolest thing. They'd go out there with me, no bee suit on because I only had one.
Yeah.
And so I'd be in the hive working on things, and they'd come up and just stand there 3 feet from the hive and just watch what I'm doing. Like,
Oh, the
they
curiosity
never
of
had a
it.
fear of it. It was just like, if dad's not scared, I'm not scared, you know?
Yeah.
So
So that being said, have you ever been asked to educate people on bees by bringing them to schools or nursing homes or other places in the community?
I've not been asked to bring bees, but I have been asked to teach about how a beehive works and how you harvest honey. Um, Last year was the first time I'd ever been asked that. There's a young mom in our church community group that meets at our house, and her son and daughter both go to a little preschool here in the valley. And they did at the preschool, they did like a 2 day thing about bees and pollination, and the kids were learning about pollination. And so she asked me, she's like, could you bring in like some of the stuff that you use to collect honey? And I said, yeah, sure. So I came to the preschool last year, and I brought with me a full box of frames that were full of honey. And then I brought my honey extractor and brought all that in. And then with the kids, we scraped the caps off the honey, and then put the frames in the extractor and spun them out. And then the kids got to watch the honey come out, and they thought it was a ton of fun. So
Absolutely. Well, plus
yeah,
just the novelty of it, because you don't,
yeah.
because you usually we're taught keep your distance, be respectful. Um, but your experience with honey is a little bit different than what mine was growing up. I remember that when I would go to church camp as a kid, the people who ran the camp wanted the peanut butter to go further for our sandwiches, so there was honey added to it, and that was kind of like my main exposure to honey. And then as
Mhm.
far as bees go, I remember my brother and I would be playing in our yard, and if someone saw, you knew from a distance if someone was around a bee because they'd be standing like this. It was like you didn't dare move,
Uh-huh. Like,
so you would
not
just stand
moving.
like this in case there was
Yeah.
a bee or a hornet or whatever it was. But people will sometimes talk about how there's a shortage of bees and what a problem that is. That being said, I'm guessing that pesticides have a role in that. But what would you say some of the biggest obstacles are for bees, and why is it so important that we try to preserve them and have them a part of our not just from an agricultural perspective, but just part of who we are and part of
A
where we
communal
live?
perspective, yeah. Um, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how many different pollinators there are. Yes, bees are a phenomenal pollinator. They're the queens of that world, right? Um, but there are tons of pollinators. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, mosquitoes actually are considered pollinators. They don't
Okay.
they 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 do the same thing, going from flower to flower and whatnot. They're not trying to create a product by it, but um, all flying insects in our world serve a purpose towards pollination. That being said, bees do that not only more efficiently than all the other pollinators, uh, but they do it on a scale where, like, all of the other pollinators combined cannot do the work that a bee does, because a bee's specific end goal is getting as much nectar as possible. And so they're working far and away more on pollination than all the other insects. But up here in Alaska, it's it's only been in the last 20 years that agriculturally we even have flowering fruit trees up here. Like, we didn't
Oh, okay.
you couldn't go to a local nursery in the 80s and 90s, maybe mid 90s it kind of started. You could go to a local nursery and get an apple tree for your yard or a cherry tree. Number one, we didn't have the root stock that could survive the temperatures, but number two, we we didn't have the pollinators that were necessary for great production on your fruits. And so in in conjunction with being able to create more sturdy rootstock, and us being able to tap into ordering bees and bringing them up to pollinate small orchards and things like that, like, it wasn't something that people did. They'd have fruit trees and they would never get fruit. They had them because they loved the blossoms. But now they can get fruit from them because
Right.
there's so many hobby beekeepers around.
Right. Huh.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I have a catch in my throat. But
Oh yeah, no worries. Do you have any idea, just kind of ballpark, how many bee hobbyists there are up in Alaska? Like, is there some kind of a club you belong to or something, or some kind of a certification or something?
there are beekeeper clubs in every major area. Fairbanks area has a beekeeping club. I live in the Matsu Valley. We have one. And then there's also one in Anchorage, and so there are local chapters that you can be a part of. The best way to get a beat on it is knowing how many hives are brought up each year. And there's only a handful of folks that do bee delivery. Sounds funny.
I was gonna say, who act as the wholesalers? So are there, now this might seem like a strange question, but are bees part of like the commodities world? I mean, if people have like bee futures, and if you take delivery of the bees, you're gonna get a train car full of bees, or
not up here. Like,
okay.
It's hard for me to answer that, man. Do you ever have that time where like there's no legitimate reason, but you're coughing?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So up here, it's strictly hobby. Like, there are a couple people that we would say are on the commercial side because they do sell it like at local farmers markets or small mom and pop stores, things like that. But by and large, most of us, 95% of us, we just want a hive or two in our yard, and that's about it. But I can tell you it's very popular. I work with one bee distributor. 4 years ago, they asked if I would help with bee delivery, and I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. I'd love to see how that works, because I've always just gone and picked up my bees. So I drove my truck into Anchorage, and they told me, okay, you're going to meet at the UPS drop, and we'll load up a bunch of trailers, and then you'll haul a trailer to Wasilla. We got one trailer going to Homer, one going up to Fairbanks. And so I've never seen this before, right? I've had bees for 5 or 6 years at that point. And I get there, Jennifer, there were so many bees, like pallets and pallets stacked, like five or six stacks high, and 10 to 15 beehives wide, and then like 7 or 8 rows deep, like millions and millions of bees. So we mathed it out. Each hive that someone picks up at the drop, each individual hive has right around 25 to 30,000 bees in it. It's a 4-pound package. There's one queen. There's 30,000 bees, and the box is like this big. Just based on those rough numbers, as I left Anchorage, I had roughly 30 million bees behind me in my trailer.
Wow.
That was kind of cool to be like, I would love to see someone hit me today. Like,
wow, no doubt. So do you have like a permit
to
carry that many bees, or is it not regulated?
No. So like,
interesting.
You're supposed to register your bees with the local borough or municipality that you're with, just so that they know how many roughly are in the area.
Yeah.
I don't think many people do, because in Alaska we're pretty like woodsy. We've been social distancing since 1959.
Right.
But yeah, like there was just this overwhelming feeling of like, I have so much stuff in the back of this trailer, and I'm driving past all these people, and they have no idea. Like,
exactly.
it was pretty cool. So, and I've done that every year since. I help out Steve and Donna. They're the local distributors for our area. So yeah, I go and pick up bees in April, and then I hand them out to people.
Now I know that when you and I initially spoke about bees, you had used the word apiary, and I'd never heard that word before. So I'm wondering, what does that mean? Is it like a cluster of hives? Is it just, What is it?
Yeah, whenever you come to like a commercial beekeeping operation and you see, hundreds of separate beehives all over the place, that's called an apiary.
Okay.
And a beekeeper is an apiarist. Um,
Well, who knew? Right.
even if you're just in the hobby, like technically I'm a hobby apiarist. I
Mhm.
never use that title. I'm like, I'm a beekeeper. But yeah, like that's the fancy term for beekeeping.
Okay. Well, one other study that I read about online regarding bees and how they can help people totally blew me away. It was about the fact that there are people now who have symptoms of Lyme's disease, which can be pretty debilitating. It's from a tick bite,
Yeah.
and it could be complete fatigue, it could be brain fog, it could be a whole litany of things. But there's a study now, and people are actively doing this too, that show that the stings from a bee, and presumably I would imagine you could probably use hornets and other things as well, but for sure bees can help with those symptoms of Lyme disease. And I thought, well, what's the connection? So then I did more research and I watched some YouTube videos and I saw people being interviewed on talk shows about it as well. But the theory is that when you get stung by a bee, it actually stimulates your immune system.
Hmm.
And there are people who swear by this bee therapy now. I know one study that I read about talked about a woman who has bees at her home, and she'll take one out of the hive or wherever it is with like a tweezer, and she'll then sting herself. And I'm not sure if it makes a difference where she gets stung, but she does. She has like X number of stings a day, and her symptoms have pretty much subsided
Yeah.
because of the fact. Now, I'm not sure if after a while, if you could build up an immunity to this. There's still a lot to be said, but studies are suggesting that there's a correlation between the sting of the bee, the stimulating of the immune system, and actually being able to treat those symptoms of Lyme's disease.
Yeah, I could
So,
totally believe that. Like
wow.
when you little side note, a couple weeks ago I had gotten in the hive and I wasn't wearing my suit and I had a bee fly up my my right t-shirt sleeve and sting me right on my arm. And I joked with my wife the next day because I mean it'll swell, you know. I was like, man, is there a way to like keep the swelling, but get rid of the itchiness? Because my bicep was amazing. But
You're like, because my bicep was amazing.
that's where I was like, man, like how do we oh, this is glorious. Um, but that kind of brings home like a bee sting creates a histamine response, right? That's why there's swelling.
Yeah.
And that histamine response is what a lot of people like. I don't know about Lyme's disease per se because we don't have ticks up in Alaska. We're
Oh,
awesome that way. Um,
totally.
but
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have poisonous spiders. We don't have any snakes. We don't have um, any ticks. Things like I mean, there you can
Oh,
find ticks and stuff that are like animal specific, but there's no like Lyme disease in Alaska, things
yeah.
like that.
Huh.
Um, so like if you're gonna die by nature out here, it's big and brown. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
but what we do have is a lot of people will ask me for honey every year because they want to increase their uh, or they want to decrease how bad their allergies are, their seasonal allergies. So like birch pollens and spruce pollens and regular hay fever, those kinds of things. By having honey in their diet from local flora and fauna, um, that that helps create a histamine response within that then lowers their
For symptoms?
susceptibility to hay fever and seasonal allergies and
Really?
things like that. Yeah.
That's
Um,
interesting.
that's the primary reason why a lot of people want to buy local honey. Um, and they pay a pretty penny for it because there's not a lot of it. So
Yeah.
knowing that consuming those things creates a histamine response in a positive way. I could totally see how like bee stings would create an inflammatory response, an anti-inflammatory, if you will,
Yeah.
on the reverse end for things like limes and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see what additional studies or current ones as they continue to move forward produce because it's just there are people like I said who are living it that swear by it. But
Yeah.
as I alluded to earlier, you don't know if you can build up a resistance, or if there's, sometimes people will say, correlation's not causation, or different kinds of things too. But
Yep.
point being, there is a noticeable difference when
Yeah.
people are taking advantage of the stings. But
Yep.
so is there anything today that I haven't asked that I should be, as far as whether it's ways that people can help bees, or ways that bees can help people, or just kind of or things that maybe you think bees get a bad rap for things, or
I
anything
think
you
the
can think?
number one thing I would say about helping bees is pretty controversial, but it's something that I feel really strongly about, and that is this newer, at least up here, it's newer. It's only been around for like probably 6 or 7 years. I'm guessing they've been in the lower 48 quite a bit longer. The idea of spraying your yard to get rid of mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There are so many people that are spraying their yard to get rid of the bugs and the insects and stuff so that it can be more enjoyable outside. And I totally get that. I hate mosquitoes just like the next guy. And up here, we joke that like it should be our state bird. Like the
Yeah,
mosquitoes up here are massive. Um, but that
they
stuff
are.
kills bees.
I was gonna
Like
say there's gonna be
just
collateral
straight up,
damage though.
it kills bees.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen like not my own, but I know literally hundreds of other beekeepers, and I've seen firsthand a sign go up in a yard, the beekeeper wasn't notified ahead of time, and then you watch that hive get decimated over the next 48 hours. And it's so frustrating because the beekeeper
Wow.
can't like once it starts, like that hive's gonna be dead.
Wow.
But if
That.
the beekeeper knows I can lock my bees up. So there's only this little tiny slit in the front of the hive where they enter and exit, right? And in the same way that over the winter, they don't leave and they're okay, like I can block the entrance and say, you don't get to go anywhere for the next 2 days. If I know ahead of time that someone in my area is going to be spraying their yard, I'm gonna I'm gonna lock my bees home. Like at the end
Right.
of the day, like if I go into my hive right now and here we are, in Alaska, it's 11 a.m. Most of my beehive, at least 40% of the beehive is already out harvesting right now. If I wait till 6 o'clock tonight, they will all be in the hive. I can put a little block in front of the entrance and I can just screw it right into the wood so no bees can get out.
Right.
And for the next 48 hours, I'd leave them alone. And then once
Right.
that spray dries and has done its job at a neighbor's house, I'll let my bees out again and let them get back to work.
Right.
So
I get that.
even when people say, "Oh, it's an all natural and it's not gonna harm the bee population," I would argue if it harms one insect, it's gonna harm all insects.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've even
but
wondered.
more than
Oh,
that, just
sorry.
telling people, tell your neighbors if you're gonna do it. Like
Hmm.
I'm full freedom. Like you do you.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what to do on my property. I won't tell you what to do on your property.
Yeah.
But good communication with your world is
Goes a long
hugely
way.
beneficial to the bees.
Mhm. I could see that. I know a number of years ago when Minneapolis hosted the Super Bowl, there were first responders in town from all across the country, including canine units. And one of the issues that came into play is that the dogs that were a part of the canine units kept licking their paws. And around here, we put like chemical salt on sidewalks and on roads
Yep.
to help with the
Yep.
ice. And that's been getting stuck in the pads of their feet. So
Yep.
thankfully, there's this paraffin now
Hmm.
that you can buy at like different pet stores and stuff. That it's like a natural wax that goes between
Yeah.
the
You just
pads.
dip it. Yeah.
Yes, and that way they can be more around the salt. But people don't always realize in this world that we live in that there can be effects that you don't anticipate with some of those
Absolutely.
chemicals and things. But um, I do want to grab my phone for a second. There was a thing with ticks that I wanted to share with you
Okay.
that I'm gonna. Have you ever heard about how there's something where if people get bit by a tick, I think it's a deer tick, that now they have issues trying to eat red meat. It's
No.
It's so bizarre. So just one second here. I'll put on here.
That's sad.
Tick. I
I
know.
love
Tick.
red meat.
Tick bites and red meat. Yeah, this is really interesting. But I didn't realize that in Alaska that you don't have snakes and don't have. And is it no spiders or no poisonous spiders?
No poisonous spiders.
That's interesting. You know, so
I'm
so
not
there are
saying
some
we're the best,
benefits.
but you can draw your own conclusions. Like
Yeah, right.
your
No, I
summer
get
has
that.
about 16 hours of daylight. Mine has 24. Like it's pretty wonderful.
Right. So check this out. I first heard about this on a podcast on NPR, but apparently there's a tick called the Lone Star tick. And so I have a paragraph here to share with everybody. Lone Star ticks transmit alpha gal. Alpha gal is an actual, like a syndrome, through their bite. Some patients' immune systems develop allergic antibodies to the sugar, which causes an allergic reaction the next time that person eats the meat of mammals, such as beef, pork, and lamb. So the allergic reaction can range from mild to severe. It's called
Hmm.
alpha gal syndrome, and it comes from a bite from the
Man.
Lone Star tick, and it affects your ability to eat red meat.
Oh my
It's so
gosh.
random. It's so just,
Yes.
I never would have made that correlation, with
Yeah.
nature. But anyway, but thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
If people do want to get more information about bees, are there any websites you can point people to? I mean, they can obviously Google it, but
Yeah.
any good resources?
Actually, I think the smartest thing to do would be to contact your local beekeeper chapter. And so like for me, it was through Facebook. Like
Mm.
I just typed in beekeeping Wasilla, that kind of thing. And the local beekeeping chapter is just every beekeeper wants to share about bees. So like in our local area, every winter they do a lesson for the community, and people can come in and learn like how to set up a beehive so that they could be ready in the spring. And in the fall they'll do lessons on how to overwinter your bees if you're wanting to go that route and things like that. And I've got someone coming over today she wants to try to overwinter. I don't overwinter. So she asked if she could have my bees. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know how to get set up for that. So I reached out to the folks that I work with, the distributors, and said, I need to know what to do. And immediately she texts me like this step by step. This is what you're going to do to set up your hive for success so that she can take it. So just
Cool.
find people in your area. Um, yes, you can YouTube and you can Google, find a beekeeper. We
Hmm.
love, like I have helped probably 15 or 20 different families get their first hive because it's
Cool.
so fun. So yeah, really person to person, face to face is my suggestion.
Oh yeah, I could see that. And you're making that suggestion because you are is it an apiary hobbyist? Is that the official title? I forget that you mentioned
I- I'm
earlier.
I'm a fun loving beekeeper, like whatever you want to call me.
Nice.
Yes,
So,
I'm a hobby
um,
apiarist.
well, thank you for being a part of this virtual interview today, Willie. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. And thank you to all of you who are listening today. Again, feel free to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube at a channel Emotional Grit. And I will see you all next time. Thank you.